Sometimes I go to see a movie with these reviews in mind, thinking, oh, that movie probably will have some cool religious themes. But I'll confess, I went to John Krasinski's A Quiet Place without any expectation of doing a religious commentary. I just thought it would be a fun night at the movies. It got very good reviews. I kind of like thrillers, but I didn't expect anything really of a religious nature. And I must say, I was just delightfully surprised by what I found. I don't claim I can find some golden thread that draws all this together into a very coherent, religious message. But I think it's hard to deny there are a lot of religious elements in this rather extraordinary movie. The plot is laid out very deftly at the beginning of the movie. There's this plague of devouring creatures that's descended upon the earth, and it appears they've killed off almost everybody. Where they came from, we don't know, which I kind of like in thrillers. It doesn't over-explain things. Was it an alien invasion of some kind? Who knows? But there are these awful creatures, and though they're blind, they are extremely acute of hearing. And so human beings have figured out, if they're going to survive, they have to remain silent. And so the movie opens, we see this young family, this young couple and their three young kids. And they're making their way through beautiful but very dangerous open country because they're exposed to these creatures, and they're maintaining a very strict silence. But then their youngest child, their boy, has a little toy rocket, and he sort of inadvertently hits the switch, and this little noise comes out, and the father panics, you can see, but then before he can get to his son, boom, he's been devoured by one of these creatures. So the movie gets our attention right away, like what's at stake here? At this point, I think it was through a sign on the mailbox, we discover the name of the family, and I don't think this is the least bit accidental. They're called the Abbotts, the Abbott family. Because I say that it's not accidental because when we see their home and how they're living, it is for all the world a monastery. Here's this family living basically in silence, almost like in a Trappist silence. They speak as the Trappists do in sign language to each other. They engage in quiet work with books, so the kids are studying. They do farming, but of course there can't be any sounds. There's no machinery or implementation or anything metallic. It's all done quietly in a kind of pre-modern way. To get their food, they fish, but again in pre-modern style. They even creep around the monastery barefoot because they can't be making any sounds. They're a bit like the discalced Carmelites, who are not wearing shoes. And maybe the most startling thing, it's a scene that I must say really got my attention because it's so rare in a Hollywood movie. Very quietly, they gather around the table before their evening meal and they join hands and they pray a silent grace. So what do we see? Well, we see this abbot and abbess, the mother and father, who are basically running a monastery, a place of silence, of quiet work at books and in the field, and of prayer. Well, what strikes me is in these more thoughtful kind of thriller movies, the beasts or the monsters, represent usually our primal fears. So our own fear of failure, our own fear of our inner darkness, our fear of sickness, of the death of loved ones, of our own death, right? So the monsters symbolize usually all these things that we're afraid of in a primal way. Well, the first move of this movie, I think, is to say the way to keep the beasts at bay is a return to a monastic life of simplicity, prayer, and care for each other. It's very clear that this family, in a moral sense of the term, even as they're in great danger, that morally speaking, they're flourishing, meaning that they are, in a very generous way, caring for each other. So is this the style of life that in fact is keeping the powers at bay? I think is a really interesting thing. Okay, the plot thickens when we realize, and again, it's not trumpeted, it's just in a very kind of quiet way, we realize that the mother, the abbess of this monastery, is pregnant. And we think, oh my gosh, how in the world is this family going to survive the birth of a newborn, a howling, crying newborn? In fact, won't the birth of this child amount to their death? I mean, they're all going to be exposed if this child is allowed to be born. But yet they are making elaborate preparations, both, I would say, psychological, spiritual, and practical, to bring this child into an extremely hostile environment. Now, I couldn't help but think of the situation in our culture where, abortion on demand is legally protected. Partial birth abortion. A child coming out of the birth canal can be killed. Even a child who by some miracle survives an abortion procedure can be killed under the protection of the law. When so many people say some version of, well, how could I bring a child into such a terrible world? I don't know. Without trumpeting this view, I think this movie presents a pretty radical pro-life position, as this family is willing to welcome life in a very generous way in the most hostile and difficult of circumstances. Now, I'm not going to go into all the plot twists and so on of the movie. Let me just highlight a couple things. When the baby's coming, the mother happens to be alone in the house. And as the baby's coming into the world, one of these awful creatures has made its way into the space and has come up the stairs to where she is. And the mother is desperately trying to maintain her own silence as the baby comes into the world to keep the baby quiet. Well, as this monster is waiting to devour the child, I couldn't help but think of that great scene in the book of Revelation, when the woman laboring to give birth as the dragon is about to devour the child. But then in the book of Revelation, the mother and child are whisked away. In this movie, the monster is whisked away. The other two children find themselves at a point in the movie in grave danger. They're outside the house, and they are trapped in an abandoned car. And one of these creatures reminded me of Jurassic Park. In fact, the movie quotes a lot of horror movies in many ways, but here's this beast kind of clawing at the car, like in that awful T-Rex scene from the first Jurassic Park. There they are. The father sees the situation. He realizes that he can't save them unless he cries out and draws the creature to himself and away from his children. And so he catches the eye of his daughter through the window of the car, and he mouths the words, "I love you," to her. And then he screams, he shouts, and of course the beast comes, devours him. Well, anybody who is sensitive to the Christian theological tradition recognizes this kind of move as what the church fathers call the Christus Victor move. That means Christ the victor, right? Christ the conqueror. How does it work? Jesus, as it were, drew the dark powers to himself, and in the process liberated those whom the dark powers had controlled. Now, the church fathers will play with that image in different ways, but the idea is, and watch my video on Clint Eastwood's Gran Torino to see another variation of this theme. By drawing the powers to himself in a self-sacrificial way, he liberates those who are enthralled to the powers. So this beautifully exemplifies the Christus Victor theory. Okay, much more I could say about this movie, but that just gives you a hint. Now, was this all in the mind of John Krasinski, who is the director of the movie, as well as the star of it? Was it in the mind of the writers? I'm not precisely sure, but it is true that Krasinski is a Catholic, and indeed a devout Catholic. His mother, Irish Catholic, his father, a Polish Catholic. I don't know. I think it's hard to deny that these themes are operative, and they make A Quiet Place, in my judgment anyway, the most surprisingly religious movie of the year.